Welcome to IP Goes Pop, your source for exploring the interface between intellectual property and pop culture. The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com. This program should not be considered legal advice. Please consult an attorney for your specific situation. And now your host, intellectual property attorney, Michael Snyder.
Greetings and cheers, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of IP Goes Pop. This week, IP Goes Pop goes to the magazine rack of yesteryear to discuss comic book characters, how they're protected by intellectual property, and some characters that are surprisingly close in costumes and abilities. Now, joining me this week is comic book fan Joseph Gushue, a fellow shareholder at Volpe Koenig. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Mike. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Love having you back. I know you have, again, I said it before, I stand by it, an encyclopedic knowledge of popular culture. I myself will often go to you for recommendations or if I have questions, because you're better than the internet, frankly, and more fun.
Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah, this is a great topic. I'm real happy to be talking about comic books. I actually got my first one when I was 4 and been pretty regular with collecting them ever since. So always happy to talk about one of these topics very near and dear to my heart.
Well, to set the table here, I wanted to go through when superheroes really emerged into the greater popular culture, not just from comic books. And by the way, like every other person that I know who collected comic books, I too have a story of my parents throwing away my comic books, which seems to be a thread for all comic book fans. But I will tell you, this episode is definitely going to be heavier on the comic geek side than the law side, although the law part is, I think, really an interesting part of intellectual property. Again, just as a disclaimer, we are not providing legal advice. If you need legal advice, please go to an attorney. But these opinions are just opinions, just for entertainment purposes, hopefully. So starting and making the jump from comics to really what may be considered the modern era, people may argue, but perhaps the modern era of when superheroes kind of made the jump into the bigger popular culture. We had the Incredible Hulk TV series in 1978 with Bill Bixby as Dr. I believe it was David Banner at the time, and Lou Ferrigno playing the transformation into the Hulk. For some people, by the way, to this day, the only true real Hulk. Now, Joe, I don't know if you were old enough to watch that series.
I'm aware of it in reruns. So, and also seeing Lou Ferrigno at every Comic-Con I've been at the Philadelphia Convention Center.
There's one story I do want to tell that I just want to put right up front. So Joe and I years ago went to the New York version of Comic-Con right in Manhattan. And there were a lot of, you could get, I believe, Val Kilmer was there signing autographs as Batman. I think Jay from
Richard Dreyfuss.
Richard Dreyfuss. Well, that's our story. So Joe and I put a lot of work. We put a lot of work into a presentation on fan-based copyright. So basically fan fiction and protecting your own works and fair use. And we were scheduled, as they often do. There was another program scheduled at the time. And as Joe and I were going in, I guess one of the people running the New York Comic Con said, well, we do have another program scheduled across the hall, so both will go on at the same time. And Joe said, oh, what's the program? They said, oh, Richard Dreyfuss is across the hall talking about Jaws. So Joe and I had 5 people that we spoke to, 3 of whom we knew already. And I think Richard Dreyfuss had many more, but that's our Comic-Con story.
Yeah, Richard Dreyfuss's pictures were also top dollar at that Comic-Con. It was a fun day, but I always remember that too, Mike.
And by the way, we didn't charge at all for our pictures. I just want to say that.
Yeah, that's right. No, we had the good badges on. People were wondering who we were with. It was a very memorable afternoon up there in New York.
Well, So same year, interestingly enough, was Christopher Reeve's Superman in 1978, where I I think this should have heralded in the major era of superhero movies. I'm not sure why they weren't lining up yet, because it was such a blockbuster, with the slogan "You will believe a man can fly." I don't know, Joe, have you gotten the chance to rewatch that original Christopher Reeve Superman for the special effects recently?
Oh yeah, definitely, Mike. I've seen that in recent years, and my father always he saw it in the movie theater, and he just talks about how amazing that was at the time. That people really couldn't believe the special effects that were able to be put into that Superman movie, and that really did kick off DC's success at the time into the movie outlet for their characters. Whereas, like you had mentioned with Marvel, they had success in the small screen, in the TV space, with Incredible Hulk and even the Spider-Man cartoon series. And Marvel also had a number of cartoons in the 80s. Also, it was just a different tack taken by both of these big players in the comic industry about how they were using these characters that originated in comic book form and brought them to life in either movies or television shows.
So we're definitely, I mean, that's a good setup. We're going to get to that today to talk about some of the competition and the approach from the two major comic companies, which are Marvel and of course DC, as everyone knows. Comic books started again. It was another DC character, Batman, Michael Keaton's Batman in 1989, and then followed not long after by Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002, which really established a place where superheroes would be part of the movie culture from then forward. It was kind of unstoppable. And I know that a lot of movie companies were trying to snap up characters. And then really starting the current phase, I guess, that we're in. I guess actually we're on to a new phase. But Marvel's Iron Man in 2008, they find Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, and it simply launches this, what can only be described as a universe, which is correctly described as a universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It sets it in motion over 23 films, over a decade, kind of all culminating. It's pretty amazing achievement, and it's hard to imagine. I guess, Joe, what other, if we think about carrying over a universe, I don't know how many movie franchises we can really compare.
Yeah, whenever you say universe like that, one that jumps to mind immediately, which is not a Marvel and DC one, is the View Askew universe Kevin Smith has created for himself with his series of movies, starting with Clerks, going up through Mallrats, Chasing Amy, and up to present day with actually remaking Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. So it's a tough to pull off for industries, and you really need someone at the helm with the creative direction for all the movies to come together and create that. And actually now we've actually gotten to a point where I think movie studios are trying to make a universe just about every movie that they come up with, and looking for tie-ins and just establishing franchises.
So the value, I mean, I looked this up on the internet, and I'll be honest, I don't know if this is definitive, but it's stated that the Marvel universe generated something like $100 gazillion. I don't know if that's accurate, to be honest. That may have been, I'm not sure if that is official, but but the intellectual property value, when Disney acquired Marvel, they're purchasing the intellectual property value of these characters to take them on, into different stories, and to, now to television, to movies, all of the merchandising. And of course, DC has also launched its cinematic universe, which had some starts and stops or diversions along the way. I think there's some catching up there, Joe.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like we were sort of touching on a little bit earlier. DC was definitely almost first to this with the Superman series of movies. Definitely things falling off quite a bit by the time they got to Superman 4. And then Batman also with the Joel Schumacher series with Michael Keaton and then Val Kilmer. And then by the time George Clooney finished up with it, that was pretty much expended that run of the franchise before having Christopher Nolan breathe new life into Batman. But it's definitely starts and stops with the DC side of things, whereas Marvel got started a bit late, and they have really been well. We'll get into this in a little bit later in the podcast. Their second attempt into making the movies has been very, very successful, with some very forgettable and unreleased Marvel movies before the Iron Man film coming out and really starting the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it now.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned, because in researching for this episode, I found out that the first appearance in TV or movies of Thor and Daredevil were in episodes or special episodes of the Incredible Hulk TV show.
Wow.
And we'll post a link to those, but they are far from the current, Chris Helmsworth,
Chris Hemsworth. These actors that are carrying movies themselves. And Daredevil, that has yet to make it to the big screen, but they had quite a successful series on Netflix with Charlie Cox's Daredevil.
It's a actually very good series, and I like how you personally have erased the Ben Affleck Daredevil.
You're right.
As if it never occurred.
I totally forgot about that, Mike. Yeah, there's actually 2 cuts of that movie too, strangely, and I've seen them both. Because the first one that was released, everyone was like, oh, that really wasn't so great. And then apparently there was some creative differences, and as there are with these movies now. And it was re-released with the original director's creative intent. And that made a lot more sense.
Well, I have to say, I think they did a disservice to Colin Farrell, who was one of the best villains.
Oh, yes. Deadshot?
Yeah, he was Bullseye, but let's get to it. So historically, DC has some of the iconic quintessential characters. Let's just set those up. What are the big DC names?
Well, you start with Superman and then Batman. And then I would say Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, and Cyborg. So you could just almost start with the Justice League as it is constituted in the movie. And all those characters very much iconic, and definitely were, I would say, more juvenile when compared against some of the Marvel comic book characters. But all the DC characters very much clean. The villains didn't get very dark, I would say, until Frank Miller with Batman Year One coming out in the 80s. That was the first and possibly most successful attempt that DC had into pivoting from these characters that people got familiar with as children. And then as their audience matured, they moved into telling some more mature stories about these characters, and then the origin of Batman. And to present day, when you look at DC Comics, and I wouldn't read any of them to my children right now, the ones that are coming out, because they are really geared towards teens rather than some younger people. And DC actually has a line of comics for kids.
Well, rewinding to the beginning. So DC's this established. It starts in 1938. I think Superman hit in Action Comics around 1939 or 1940. So they are the titan, of comics. And then along comes this startup, or actually it was an existing book, but along comes this young, around the 1960s, this young writer-editor, Stan Lee. You may have heard the name. What did he do differently to kind of make Marvel a force to be reckoned with, or at least to compete with, really this Goliath with the names you just named? I mean, how do you start from a blank sheet of paper and compete with Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman?
Well, we'll get into this, I think, in the next little bit of this podcast, Mike. But Stan Lee really surrounded himself with some extremely talented comic book artists and creators. And he worked and was able to really create a brand as a salesman and innovator in this space, and creating characters that young people could really relate to. They were dealing with some of the challenges that they had, and that was characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four was extremely different than anything that DC had, because instead of having secret identities, these were characters that they were who they were. They didn't wear any They didn't have a secret identity to go to. They were just known as a super team and dealing with problems that teenagers had and family relationships, just things that were definitely not found in the comic book space before.
And with that, they also had some really interesting, Jack Kirby art, I know, in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
That is also pretty iconic. You know it as soon as you see it. There was also some, and we're not going to get into the history of it, but there was certainly some back and forth with DC and Marvel trying to, get certain ideas out into the public first.
Oh, yeah. Especially in the 60s, there was, when Marvel was coming onto the scene, a lot of concern about nuclear war and radiation and things like that. So you'll see that theme go back and forth with the creation of different characters. And like you had mentioned, with Jack Kirby working at Marvel, Steve Ditko working at Marvel, these are just legendary figures in the comic space, and they really did a lot to develop the characters of Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. And they both, as they had issues with Stan Lee and left Marvel and went to DC, so a lot of the same people were going company to company and coming up with different ideas and characters in order to keep driving this medium of telling stories.
And it might not have been that small a world, because I think it was all in New York at the time too. So with people, with it being a small comic book world and people changing, it's not surprising that some of the ideas might have gotten through. But we've named so many iconic characters that people know their entire lives. And as soon as you hear the words, you could picture their name, their origin story, their secret identity, the kind of vehicles they drive, the colors of their costumes. So the question is, from an IP perspective, when can a character be protected just as a character? So not tied to a story. We know in copyright, we protect works of authorship, scripts, anything written, literary text, sculpture, art, music. But there actually is, and people may not know this, there can be copyright protection for comic book characters apart and outside of any specific story. If that character is so defined, and you can essentially picture the character, as I was just describing, outside of any particular story, you can actually have character protection. And I'll go through a little bit of the law here. So starting in 1930, there was a case called Nichols v. Universal, and it was a case in the Second Circuit. And you may notice, if you are a copyright fan, a lot of the law is driven out of either the Second Circuit, where a lot of entertainment comes out of, or the Ninth Circuit, California. Second Circuit being New York, Ninth Circuit being California, where, of course, a lot of entertainment comes out of. And the question was whether characters in a play could be protected outside the play. And the test was really that if the characters aren't really developed, or it's story driving the characters rather than the characters driving stories, or if the characters weren't that delineated in their characteristics, then they couldn't get protection, and someone else could make a story with similar characters. And this was Judge Learned Hand. And with a name like Learned Hand, I don't know what to say, but that was his name. And he's a very famous and well-respected judge. Actually, Learned he did not go by his first name. His name was Judge Billings Learned Hand. So there you go. Another thing you learn on IP Goes Pop. This isn't all fun and games. You actually can learn something if you pay attention. So the next case along the timeline of character protection was in 1940, Detective Comics, which actually is the full name of DC Comics, also in the Second Circuit, in the New York Circuit. So this is 1940, so it's about a year after Superman was created. And it was whether Superman was entitled to copyright protection. Now, I believe that due to the popularity, that might have driven some of this case, but also it was tied. It wasn't really clear from the decision if it was specifically the character or that it was so entwined in the story. And they also found that the story copied some of the copyrighted elements as well. So not as clear yet. The next case that comes up in this analysis was Warner Brothers versus CBS, and it was about the Sam Spade character. And it's often referred to as the Sam Spade case. And there they found that the Sam Spade character was not enough of a character. It wasn't sufficiently delineated to have copyrights in just the character apart from a story. In that case, then they would have to really copy it very closely. So that was not a win, essentially, for Sam Spade. Next up, and you had to hear the name Disney coming around the bend when we talk about characters. So in California, 1972, if you have a cartoon character who has an image that's really intertwined and has a lot of personality and other traits, so it kind of has its own concept, then that character can itself have a protection as a copyright character. Now, it's not surprising that Disney was successful in protecting their characters, but you can see that it's harder, or at least the case law makes it harder for either a literary character to be protectable, which is driven by story, rather than a comic book or cartoon character, which really you're watching Mickey Mouse for his personality or some of the other Disney characters.
Yeah, when you have the pictorial representation of the character, that gives you an extra benefit. And preparing for this podcast, Mike, and reading some of these cases, and it's really interesting how you can see the owners of the IP rights really pushing for stronger protection in these spaces and almost creating law for themselves, and with their lobbying and pushing certain cases forward to decisions and trying to strengthen up the intellectual property rights that they do have in these characters that they're creating.
That's a perfect segue into the next case. Is my favorite case in the podcast today. So this is the DC Comics versus Towle, Towle case from the Ninth Circuit, again, California, 2015. Here, the DC Comics wanted to stop someone from making copies of the Batmobile. And I believe it was the classic Batmobile from the late 1960s TV show.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about it. The turned out right before this case was actually filed by DC, they were at the San Diego Comic-Con where they had all of the Batmobiles ever created, used in any film or TV show displayed. And that is really what I think gave DC something to move forward to bring this suit here, because Towle was running a business that was creating these custom Batmobiles for any individual that wanted to be driving around in a Batmobile. So it was iconic and very much recognized by the attendees at Comic-Con that the Batmobile was something that fans were very much interested in. And even now, with each new Batman movie, one of the first bits of teaser information put out there for fans is, this is what the Batmobile looks like in this particular movie.
And I just want to I actually got to meet the original creator and designer of the Batmobile from the 1960s, George Barris. So just a tip of the hat to him, and for creating what turned out to be, as held in this case. The Batmobile was protected separately as a character. The Batmobile had such a distinctive look and such distinctive attributes and features, and was sufficiently delineated, as the case law uses the term, that it was protectable as a character. Were you surprised, Joe, by this one? Because I was.
Oh, very much so, Mike. It was pretty interesting. And going back from the first appearance of the Batmobile, which was basically a car, until Bill Finger and Bob Kane decided to, I think, dress it up a little bit more and start put the actual Batman face on the front of the vehicle, which happened pretty soon thereafter the introduction of the Batmobile. And reading the opinion, it was interesting how the court characterized the personification of the Batmobile. Basically, into what you were saying, it being distinctive, and the court in their test sufficiently delineated. They said the Batmobile is described as waiting like an impatient steed, straining on the reins, shivering as its supercharged motor throbs with energy. As Batman jumps into it and goes to and from his crimes and crime fighting.
So the chance of the judge who wrote that not being a comic fan are very low.
Oh, I would think so. Yeah, very low. And I would think if you're a judge and you get a case like this in front of you, you're counting your lucky stars about how you're able to listen to some of these arguments about, all these issues that you're aware of and that really concern the entire public. So very, very big decisions here.
And by the way, if I'm DC Comics for that case, I'm getting permission to drive a Batmobile into the courtroom, and that would be case over. But this got me thinking about some other vehicles from TV and movies that might also be their own characters under this test, sufficiently delineated with consistent, widely identifiable traits. So Knight Rider, the famous car that spoke and actually had a voice to it. I think that might meet the test here.
I think so too, Mike. It's it doesn't have, it's black car with the red, I think the distinctive red light, perhaps moving back and forth on the car, showing Kit speaking and things like that would definitely work in its favor. And then another one that comes to mind is Wonder Woman's invisible airplane. I'm not sure how that would work with this and some of the different tests that we have, because the physical quality of that would be absence of physical quality. So,
no, that's a good point.
Just something else to think of with.
Let me throw a few other famous vehicles at you. Star Trek, Starship Enterprise.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that, the later series were even named after the Enterprise. So it's very, very much, I believe, a distinctive. And much like the Batmobile, there have been a number of different versions of that as the Enterprise gets blown up on its missions. And they're working on building new ones in each of the new movies, because Captain Kirk is very good at getting the Enterprise destroyed, yet they keep giving him a new one whenever that does happen.
They give him a better one, better one every time. Okay, I'll come at you with another one. Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, yeah. So much so that I think that all the Star Wars planes have almost, they're so distinctive. If you were to show anyone an X-Wing, Y-Wing, TIE Fighter, Millennium Falcon, it really helps them that they have these physical qualities, and then how each of the planes or each of the vehicles operate in a different manner with them deploying their weapons and things like that. I think you'd have a very strong case to be made that they are copyrightable characters.
And if you think about it, maybe even more so than the Batmobile, the Millennium Falcon, when you see it, you really feel something about it, about that vehicle as a character. So it is kind of ornery, and you have to hit the dashboard, if that's what it's called in space, to make it work. And everyone jokes that it's all beat up, yet it's, but it still works, I guess.
Mike, it can make the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, even though we have no idea what that means. That is very distinctive of the Millennium Falcon. So I think that also helps.
So that one is kind of the easiest one. So moving kind of along, in the timeline, in 1989, again, we're back in California, Anderson v. Stallone. You hear Stallone, you think Rocky, and someone tried to write a Rocky script without permission. There was a lot of studio wrangling here. But when it came time to determine whether the character Rocky was allowed, was given copyright protection as a character, it was almost, it was very easy, because it's such a well-drawn character. It has, Rocky has physical characteristics, emotional characteristics. He had his hat that he always wore. He had the fingerless gloves, a certain mannerism of speaking. So taking that all into account, again, for you writers out there, the more you define the character, the more likely it is to get to kind of have to breathe life into it outside or unattached to any specific literary work.
That's a real good point, Mike. The more descriptive qualities you can give your character, if you're just working in the written form, the better. If it's just a sentence or two, you really have a tough case to make that your character is sufficiently described and sufficiently delineated and describes enough physical and as well as conceptual qualities for the character. So you want to make sure you describe the person or object enough that they are distinctive.
And speaking of distinctive objects, the last case I'll mention here is Toho versus William Morrow and Company, again, California, 1998. The character in this case, Godzilla. And it was found that, of course, Godzilla had enough characteristics, as it says. I'll read a quote here. And this is the quote from the case is a good snapshot of the kind of analysis that the courts get to. And by the way, courts like to have fun, just like anyone else. So I'm sure these cases mix it up for them, as the intellectual property cases often do. So it says, in this case, Godzilla has likewise developed a constant set of traits that distinguish him, her, it. I think that's kind of funny that is in the actual opinion from other fictional characters. While Godzilla may have shifted from evil to good, there remains an underlying set of attributes that remain in every film. Godzilla is always a prehistoric, fire-breathing, gigantic dinosaur alive and well in the modern world. This court finds that Toho's Godzilla is a well-defined character and highly delineated, with highly delineated, consistent traits. Therefore, they demonstrated ownership in Godzilla as a character. That's a summary. I think that's really the modern test. What we take from all this, and by the way, Joe, you brought up in our preparation a great example where it is a character that's really distinctive, but there's no way it could be created, it could be protected as its own character, which are the George Romero zombie movies.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, Mike, because he basically invented a whole genre unto itself with zombies, this sort of a dead creature that comes back to life and eats the living. And that was really never challenged in any of these cases. And you just see ever since the creation of this concept and Night of the Living Dead and things, all those films, other zombie movies, 28 Days Later, which took it in a slightly different direction. And then Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead comic book series, which I read an article discussing that was originally supposed to be set in the George Romero film universe in that time and just sort of pick up where it left off there. And that's why there's so much similarities between the Walking Dead comic book and the George Romero films. But George Romero just got a thank you. You inspired all this, and he never was able to enforce any intellectual property rights that he had on that particular character, because I think when you weigh what he did against some of these tests, I don't know if it's really distinctive enough, because you do need to have this personality brought into the character itself. And the courts, I think, are hesitant to stop a whole genre like he did. So he was almost he was out of luck with his idea and how it was presented with respect to the intellectual property rights with it.
I think one of the problems there is that really just the zombie itself has this set of characteristics which are always the same. But I think we get into in copyright what's called scenes of fare, which is almost obligatory for the genre, so that the George Romero, let's say, zombie is going to be similar to every other zombie, or whatever the Walking Dead do, or Rising from the Crypt. I think that unless you had a specific zombie character that itself carried, a feature and had some other traits other than wanting to eat brains, I think that's really the only way to try to have a zombie character that lives. I think actually there probably are some. I'm not enough of a fan of the genre to pick one out.
I'm trying to think of one, like a helping zombie in any of these, or an evil zombie. Like there's the DC universe has a villain called Solomon Grundy that Batman fights. And I think based on how he's described and everything, he's protectable. And then obviously each of the Marvel and DC, they have a vampire character. In Marvel, it's Mobius, who fights Spider-Man, and that would be protectable too, even though being a undead being with sharp teeth that drinks blood, that would be how he's presented there, along with some of his other characteristics, definitely protectable.
I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I did want to get in this episode looking at, we talked about this DC/Marvel battle, or what I call proximity wars. That is, they're so close, or somewhat close. Maybe to comic fans, they're not close at all. But I just wanted to go through really quickly how DC will have a character and Marvel will have a very similar type character. So, Joe, if we could just run some of these down with just some of the attributes, and I will take your opinion kind of close or not really.
Oh, sure thing, Mike. Yeah, and before we get started, I do want to say one of the things that people may not be aware of is when Stan Lee was given the reins as a 19-year-old editor of the what became Marvel, he was told to get into making comic book characters because DC had just come out with the Justice League, and his bosses were like, we need a superhero team. You got to come up with something to compete with it. And that's how the Fantastic Four came about. So by each of these two heavyweights looking at what the other's doing, you will see some of these common ideas among both companies.
So I want to start with, I guess, kind of the more accessible one. So let's do, how about Green Arrow and Hawkeye?
Yeah, well, I think they're very, very much similar, except one wears green and the other wears purple. But
so right there,
that's a difference. Green Arrow, he is a very wealthy background, and Hawkeye not so much. He's more of a carnival performer and orphan, but extremely similar characters, and each of them also have similar sidekicks.
They even have they're two of those heroes where when they are quote unquote in disguise, they're not really putting a lot of effort into it. It's just kind of a small mask.
Yeah, facial hair too, I guess, where Green Arrow will have a little facial hair, Hawkeye not so much.
All right, so how about, so DC has Aquaman, Marvel has Namor or Namor?
Yeah, Namor,
and or Submariner or Submariner. I don't know if you're a Submariner or Submariner guy.
Submariner. He has not found his way into movies yet, but this is back to this what's called like the golden age of Marvel characters with Submariner and Captain America, where they were actually fighting in World War II, and just based on the timeline of that. But they're like Submariner was actually almost a villain to start, or I think he was a villain when he started. But they're whereas Aquaman is not a villain, he's been a hero, and both of them are kings of the Atlantis or underworld, the undersea kingdoms, and both have more of a slant now about the pollution and making sure that the oceans are not contaminated. And that has really come out in Aquaman in the 80s and to present day. But similarly, for all those similar characteristics that they have, both characters have not really found their footing with the comic books that they're really in. They a lot reinvented over the years and keep having new creative teams to come up with some stories with them. And they've really suffered from a lack of foe, especially Aquaman anyway. Your rogues gallery of
By the way, I don't know if my dates are right, but this says that the Submariner was 2 years, 1939, 2 years before Aquaman, 1941. I don't know if that's the case, but that would be interesting if true.
Yeah, I think it is. It's very interesting because this looks like where DC lifted off of Marvel rather than the other way around, which is, I think, most of the other.
By the way, and we're not saying anyone lifted anything. We're just saying
inspired. I'm sorry. Yes, inspired by maybe another character.
Or maybe they never heard of it. But if you think about it, you can picture, someone running into the office of the writers and saying, we need an ocean person, and get on that. All right. How about Adam Atom, and Ant-Man.
Yeah, they're extremely similar. And both smart characters creating this technology that allowed the main character to become small. The one thing that Ant-Man has going for it that the Atom did not, because he's not really been around too much in DC Comics as of recent times, but Ant-Man also became Giant Man. So he has the ability to become larger than normal person size also. So I would say for the couple that we've talked about, they're probably the most different.
Okay. Well, here, if you think they're the most different, let me give you these next two characters. And I think here they're not, someone wasn't even trying. Swamp Thing and Man Thing.
Yeah. Yeah. They, and even looking at the years in which they came out, they're extremely similar. Like the names you'll see some characters have, you're like, oh, wow, that didn't really stretch it too far from this other character, which is very similar to them. Like you had also, we're going through our notes here. Another thing that struck me out, Mike, when you sent me this was Thanos and Darkseid. And that didn't even really jump out at me until you had called it out. So like some of these characters, you don't even realize how similar they may be until someone brings it up to you, because you just may be convinced in that way.
No, that's a great, I mean, that's, again, I want to do a little exercise, and this will be the last thing we do, but it'll be fun. I'm going to describe a superhero to you, and then you tell me who it is, okay? So he has a trauma, becomes, he's very wealthy, probably a billionaire, becomes a superhero, has a long flowing cape, kind of lives by night, seeking out, vengeance upon the wrongdoers. Any guesses so far?
Well, I think at first it would be Batman would first come to mind.
That's right, but I'll give you one more tip. He dresses in white instead of black.
That would be Moon Knight?
Moon Knight, who I have heard referred to as Marvel's Batman in a way, but happens to be my favorite character from when I was still reading comics. But you could see, I mean, just being a very rich crime fighter who happens to have a helicopter as well, by the way. I think I'm making it worse, not better. But my point is,
if you do start with the wealthy character like that and the trauma, it's like, oh, before you said the cape, it's like, oh, well, that could be both Batman and Iron Man. They are very similar with these. You have your billionaire, a lot of money, a lot of toys and tech, no other superpowers. Both Marvel and DC have a couple characters that can fit into those buckets.
And another thing, as far as protecting characters, these comic book characters have these have these detailed origin and backstories, which I think adds to them as being protectable as separate characters in copyright. In fact, there was a time you couldn't go to the movies without seeing an origin story, to the point where people don't want to see the origin stories anymore.
Oh, yeah. That brings a quote to mind. Grant Morrison, who's a very successful comic book author, was going through his process. And with respect to him speaking about Batman, he said, Batman always must be Bruce Wayne, and he always must have a Batmobile and a butler. I can take them to the edge, but it will always come back to the basics. Unlike novel characters, comic book characters last an eternity. And that's just an interesting quote there, because as varied as these stories get, the people that are writing the individual stories as they hand it off to different creative teams can only really move the narrative of the character so far from the basics. They can't, every so often a new creative team will come and add a new wrinkle. They try to almost like a distinctive mark, leave their mark on the character. We added a villain, or we've added this to the canon of the character. So that's going to be a part of their story. But they can't move it too far away from what's made the character successful. So that's why some of these characters have been with us for almost 100 years, or approaching 100 years. A lot of the basics are the same, and that's it's tough, and it needs to be reset from time to time. This is probably a problem that the people that came up with these characters never thought they would have to deal with. And there's actually a word for that. It's called a retcon. That means they'll take a character so far down a certain path, paint themselves into a corner, and they're like, all right, you know what? We're just going to restart things from this point. And so it basically creates its own little universe and its own little side story there. And so to avoid some of these problems where creative teams are penciled into this way of telling a story, you'll find that both DC and Marvel have these things called like Elseworlds or what if stories. And that lets someone to take the character and go completely off the deep end and just have like a one-off story about Batman if he grew up with his parents, or what if Superman was found by Batman's parents and raised that way.
Well, what if actually, as an owner of What If number 1, what if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four, which was not much of a story. It was, it all worked out. But you really picked the perfect quote to end on. And again, Joe, thank you so much. I know you'll be back. Love these conversations. Love to go deep with you into pop culture.
Yeah, it was great to talk about these characters we all like so much with you. So thanks for the opportunity.
So to sign off, I believe it was Tina Turner who sang "We Don't Need Another Hero." Well, Joe and I respectfully disagree. We need many, many more heroes, and hope to see them from rise from the comic book characters we talked about. So for Joe, myself, and everyone else at Volpe Koenig, thank you for listening to this episode of IP Goes Pop.
The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com.